Today we're assigning core principles for regulating the United States financial system.
You're requesting information on penny stocks that had huge upside potential with very little downside risk.
What we're doing is we are returning to the American people, low and middle income investors and retirees, their control over their own retirement savings.
Something just came across my desk, John. It is perhaps the best thing I've seen in the last 6 months.
This is about Main Street.
John, one thing I can promise you, even in this market, is that I never ask my clients to judge me on my winners. I ask them to judge me on my losers because I have so few. Thank you for your vote of confidence. Welcome to the Investor Center.
There's no question about it. There are wolves in every business. Unfortunately, that goes for the financial services industry also, as seen in the hit movie The Wolf of Wall Street. Leonardo DiCaprio played a real-life stockbroker, Jordan Belfort. Belfort was sentenced to prison in 1995 after being found guilty of bilking investors out of hundreds of millions of dollars. He was also ordered to pay back more than half that money to his victims. Now, naturally, the vast majority of brokers and financial advisors are honest, qualified, ethical professionals. But let's face it, in any profession where the stakes are high, regulation is an important tool for protecting consumers. But just how much regulation is enough and how much is too much? When does overregulation start to do more harm than good? With new regulatory proposals on the table for the financial services industry, these are timely and important questions. It's time now to tune out the hype and focus on the facts. Facts that matter to you, the income generation. Let's get started. Get ready to separate reality from myth.
With us, David Scranton.
David Scranton.
David Scranton.
David Scranton.
But David Scranton says, hey, not so fast.
How does it affect the markets? How does it affect the economy? Thanks to efficiencies in new technology and a staff of veteran analysts and portfolio managers, Sound Income Strategies strives to set new standards and bring institutional-style investing to your portfolio. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, your host. Regulation, the good, the bad, and the unnecessary is our topic today. We're going to be breaking it down with the help of some highly qualified experts. We'll also get some insights later on from some of my fellow financial advisors who jump through regulatory hoops on a daily basis. But first, let's talk about why this is such an important topic today. Hopefully, you've never been the victim of a Jordan Belfort or a Bernie Madoff. We also hope your financial advisor is trustworthy and highly qualified and has all the other traits necessary to help you protect and grow your money. The trouble is, just one Jordan Belfort is one too many for the industry. Corrupt brokers and advisors not only destroy lives, they tarnish our entire industry. We probably all know someone with a bias against some profession because he or she firmly believes, well, they're just all alike. Luckily, whether you're talking about doctors, lawyers, mechanics, or financial advisors, all of these industries are regulated to help prevent or weed out illegal and or unethical practices. FINRA is one of two agencies that regulates this industry on behalf of investors. The other, as you probably know, is the Securities and Exchange Commission, otherwise known as the SEC. Together, FINRA and the SEC hold brokers and financial advisors to an extremely high ethical and professional standard. Those who fail to live up to that standard run the risk of penalties that can include losing their licenses, severe fines, lawsuits, and of course, imprisonment. I firmly believe it's always a great idea to hold professionals in any industry to the highest possible standard. I also believe that the vast majority of professionals in my industry take it upon themselves, as I do, to serve their clients and customers with honesty and with the highest level of professionalism and integrity. It's just good business. That said, I also believe that, like me, the majority of honest, ethical advisors and brokers in the industry welcome regulatory insight. Why? Because again, it helps expose and eliminate the few wolves who help create bias against the entire industry. But just when does regulation become an obstacle for the consumer? After all, we have seen it happen in other industries. And it's an important question now for my industry in light of a new regulatory proposal put forth by the Department of Labor during the Obama administration known as the DOL fiduciary rule. This particular rule had been scheduled to go into effect on April 10th of this year. President Trump, however, ordered a review in early February that could delay the rule's implementation or eventually stop it outright. The way in which the rule is written is what is causing some concern in the news by individuals like myself. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer called the fiduciary rule a solution in search of a problem. Given the level of regulatory oversight that already exists, the rule, all 1,023 pages of it, seems just a bit excessive. And that brings up my other main concern, which is that the rule, in its current form, could very well end up doing more harm to the very people it's supposedly intended to help. Everyday investors saving for retirement like you. This actually seems to be a recurring issue sometimes with liberal administrations. Laws and regulations created with ideology meant to protect or help the average Joe end up actually hurting him because they aren't thought through thoroughly enough. The implementation really becomes the issue. Or in some cases because these things are too politically motivated to be practical. Obamacare is an example that I would consider to be a very good one, and I'd put it in the same camp as the DOL rule in that regard. But this DOL fiduciary rule, if it is eventually implemented in its current form, could end up being another Obamacare. Again, we've seen it happen in other industries, in particular, the medical industry. You know, there are many parallels between the potential downside impacts of the DOL rule and the negative effects of the current medical regulatory environment, which is being pushed on doctors and patients. We'll talk about that much more later on in the show, and we'll also get some additional insights and perspectives from my financial advisors roundtable. But right now it's time to welcome my first guest, David Stockman. David, tell me, what do you feel is the right amount of regulation to allow free markets to operate while also policing potential corruption that could jeopardize the whole financial advisory world?
Well, I'm for minimum regulation because I think you have to understand why the so-called abuses happen, especially the scare that we had in 2008, 2009 with the crash. I think the problem is not that the SEC is not forceful enough in enforcement, but the Fed has created way too much money, way too much ease, low interest rates, has propped up the stock market to such an extent that it's become a Wild West casino. And when you create a casino, you're asking for trouble. So I think the whole Dodd-Frank thing is a monstrosity, 2,000 pages, 200 rulemakings, a lot of them not done yet. They're tying the financial system in knots for no good reason. We ought to go to the source of the problem, have a house cleaning at the Fed, and the real regulatory problem we have today is the Fed regulates, pegs interest rates across the whole maturity spectrum, and that's the heart of the problem of speculation. So I think Janet Yellen ought to be, in the crosshairs of what needs to happen here, not some broker who's trying to manage an account for his clients.
If you think about it, even before Janet Yellen, Federal Reserve, I mean, it goes back to Ben Bernanke, it goes back to Greenspan. Really, it's been 20, 25 years from now that it's been this just flood of cheap money. And each time they lower rates, rates get lower and lower each time. Each time they go up, they don't go up quite as far. So it even goes beyond Janet Yellen. Am I correct?
Yes, you're correct. I think it started in 1987. The balance sheet of the Fed was $200 billion at the time. It had taken, 75 or 80 years to get there. Today, it's $4.5 trillion. So we've had a 22-fold increase in the balance sheet of the Fed. Now, what did they do with that 22-fold increase? They bought bonds, they bought securities hand over fist, they flushed cheap liquidity into the market, they encouraged a buildup cumulatively of massive speculation. And of course, when you get that kind of casino, it's not just Janet Yellen, you're right, it goes all the way back to '87. You're going to have bubbles that burst, you're going to have people that are hurt. Remember, in the dot-com bust, which I blame the Fed for, $8 trillion were lost by home gamers who got sucked in to the speculation near the end. In 2007 and 8, when the mortgage bubble busted and then Wall Street went down, another 10 or 11 trillion was lost. So I think
it's funny, Dave.
Obviously,
We talk about, the term I use, you've probably heard before, is like, I call it economic steroids. You know, they're like the kid on the playground that's pushing the drug, you know, or the adult in the playground that's pushing the drug. And what happens now is we've created a country of individuals that have gotten used to that drug of economic steroids. And now, you know, weaning off any addiction is always hard. And I think that's kind of what we're going through, is it not?
Yes, I think it is, but we have to remember what that causes. It destroys discipline in financial markets. When you have markets that only go one way up, when you have people that learn year after year that you buy the dips and the market's going to go up tomorrow, that there's really no downside risk and that the Fed is there to prop up things if a black swan should appear on the horizon, then you get more and more reckless, careless behavior, and then the people who are the subject of these ridiculous DOL fiduciary rules get sucked in over their head, and they end up having their head handed to them. But you don't solve that by regulating tens of thousands of brokers and other financial intermediaries. You go to the 12 people sitting on the open market committee at the Fed who are causing the problem. And I don't know whether the Trump administration is going to get this right or not. They've taken one step correctly, and
we'll see,
that
but
is they've said.
I'm sorry, you will see, but you have to agree, though, it's better than the previous administration. We have a better shot under the Trump administration with any luck.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I hope they would turn their guns to the real target of the problem, which is the Federal Reserve, and they've been quiet. And they've got too many Goldman Sachs people in there who, you know, have had a career, made a living, a prosperous living, you know, riding the bubbles that have been created by the Fed. And so they're not likely to go front and center at the problem. They should be telling Janet Yellen, you're done. You've created a huge mess. And remember, these bubbles,
I can't imagine that actually happening, but I can't say I argue with you either. But David, I'm going to ask you to stick around. We have to take a commercial break right now. We have a lot more to talk about. And for our income generation viewers, you stick around also. We'll be right back with more from David Stockman. This is fun. This is great. 3, 2, 1. But I'd like to take a few seconds and tell you why I decided to write the book entitled Return on Principle. Basically, it all boils down to this. Let's face it, you deserve to live a happy retirement. It's as simple as that. But for many, the subject of money, finance, and math is complicated. Here's a fun fact. Many Americans claim that they'd much rather clean a toilet than calculate a tip in a restaurant. Thank you, I guess. But it doesn't have to be that complicated. Using the 7 core values I outline in my book, you too will be able to build a life based upon the right core principles. Cut. Return on Principle isn't just a book about financial investing, it's about investing in your life. I know for a fact that you're going to love it. Okay, now it's just getting a little weird here.
We've repealed 3 regulations that would have cost the economy hundreds of millions of dollars and tens of thousands of jobs. We've already done that. So we should get some credit for already repealing regulations. It's the first time in 20 years we've repealed a regulation.
Welcome back to the Income Generation. You've just heard from Republican Senator Rand Paul discussing recent rollbacks in regulation, which goes perfectly with the name of today's show, Deregulating America. Now let's bring in our guest again, David Stockman. He's the author of Trumped, A Nation on the Brink of Ruin and How to Bring It Back. Thanks for sticking around, David. And just so I understand your thesis here, you know, it's funny, I've had so many guests on the show that agree with you that it's been the Federal Reserve that's really at fault. And I can't argue with anything you've said, but tell me, why the DOL? Like you said, I'm regulated by the SEC, and I know they do a pretty good job of, for lack of a better way to put it, getting in my shorts during an audit and making sure that we're all buttoned up and doing the right thing for clients. So how does the DOL come in out of left field, and why?
Well, I think that's just congressional politics, and I think it's the result of being focused on the wrong target. as I said before, if you want to deregulate America, and it's necessary if we're going to get growth going again and some real breadwinner jobs, which we haven't really had any growth for a decade and a half, then we have to stop regulating interest rates to zero, because what that's doing, and people don't recognize it, it's not only creating windfalls for some speculators on Wall Street, that's bad enough, but it's inducing corporate America, the C-suites as I call them, the top executives and boards, to raise trillions of dollars with cheap debt to buy back their own stock or to engage in
artificially
M&A
inflate
deals,
prices.
Creating monster companies that really do not help the economy, and then they end up restructuring and closing plants and stores and reducing jobs and so forth.
So let me play devil's advocate for a second, David, if I can. That's all good, and I agree 110%. But how about the fact that right now there's no regulation? If an advisor wants to manage money, they want to charge 3% a year or 5% a year because they're good enough salespeople to sell the prospective client on it. In the last minute or so we have today, I'd like to talk about that. Tell me, is that okay, or should there be some limit? Should there be some more regulation than we currently have, and what would that look like?
No, I don't think there should be any regulation at all. We should have a free market. After all, the market for investment consists of consenting adults. And the fact is, markets work. Consumers learn how to shop. And, the investment product is really no different than anything else they're buying on Amazon or all the other comparison shopping they do in every other walk of life. And it's just a paternalistic notion that comes out of Washington that people can't be allowed to make their own decisions, or that brokers and other investment advisors can't be allowed to function as the market will permit. Remember, sooner or later, if you abuse people, sooner or later, if you don't deliver a product at a price for value, the market will move away from you. There's nothing wrong with the free market. We ought to get rid of the DOL regulation and half of what the SEC does.
Sure. And if you think about it, David, it's kind of condescending to tell our loyal income generation viewers in a way that they're not smart enough to make their own decisions. So bottom line from David Stockman is simple. Full disclosure. As long as we have enough regulation to ensure full disclosure, then the free markets work. David, thanks so much for joining us today. I appreciate your time. And now let's talk more about the Department of Labor fiduciary rule. The proposed rule does in some ways have the potential to do more harm than good for everyday investors. But what is the rule exactly? The fiduciary rule expands the definition of investment advice fiduciary from the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, otherwise known as ERISA. Under this expanded definition, all financial professionals who work with retirement plans or give retirement planning advice are elevated to the level of a fiduciary. A fiduciary, simply put, is someone who is legally bound to act in the best interest of his or her clients. And many professionals in this industry already have fiduciary status. A registered investment advisory firm, such as Sound Income Strategies, for example, is required to operate as a fiduciary. Operating as a fiduciary is a higher level of accountability than what's called the suitability standard that exists for non-fiduciaries, such as brokers, insurance agents, etc., who work with retirement plans. They operate under the suitability standard. Most work on a commission basis actually is under a suitability standard, but under the current rule, they could face more challenges than fee-based fiduciaries, challenges that would also hold them to a fiduciary standard, but can also impact many-day investors. In the meantime, brokers and advisors not wanting to risk getting caught up in one of those lawsuits could start limiting their use of commission-based investments. At the same time, they could start becoming much more particular about taking on new clients, deciding that perhaps those below a certain asset level are no longer worth the risk of litigation. Let me give an example. Let's say we have an advisor who's not willing to take on clients with $50,000 in total assets. If he were paid a 5% commission, that nets him $2,500 in revenue for helping this particular client. But let's say, on the contrary, that if the liberal courts decide that reasonable compensation is only 1%, Now, that same client represents just $500 in revenue to that financial advisor. Now, the question becomes, is handling that particular client still worth it from a business perspective for that advisor compared to the risks of litigation? And for advisors who specialize in small to average size portfolios, their entire practice may no longer be viable. And by the way, this also creates a potential barrier for new advisors coming into the business. Because if someone coming out of college, for example, wants to specialize in working with smaller or average size investors, he or she may no longer have that option. Very possibly couldn't support himself on a 1% commission, and even if he could, the risk probably wouldn't be worth it. Only those new advisors coming in who have contacts to wealthy high-end investors might be the only ones in the future that are not being barred from market entry. So not only do consumers end up getting priced out of the equation, but the entire industry soon becomes smaller with less competition. And as you know, less competition is never good for a free market. For advisors like myself, who already work as fiduciaries, the Department of Labor rule may be harmful in other ways. The biggest concern is that it adds a potentially crippling additional layer of legality to a process where many layers already exist. In other words, fiduciaries might be forced to second guess or forego certain decisions or certain recommendations because they have to be more focused on protecting themselves than serving you, their clients. That's especially troubling for businesses like my own, Sound Income Strategies, which don't rely on cookie-cutter investment plans or solutions, or limit their clients to a narrow field of stock market-based investment options. We work with clients who are retired or close to retirement, income generation members, on an individual basis to custom build, to tailor-make a plan that suits your specific needs and goals. We need and want to be able to use as many different tools and strategies as possible. But think about it. Under a rule that could greatly increase a fiduciary's vulnerability to lawsuits, that fiduciary just may be more apt to give the client what I call a vanilla recommendation. Never mind that he knows a more specialized, tailor-made, custom-built recommendation would be better suited for the client's needs. He might still be forced to give that vanilla recommendation to cover his own rear. Of course, this cover-yourself mentality already exists in this industry to a large extent under existing regulations. Things like mutual funds or outsourcing management to third-party managers. These are ways to distance themselves from their own work and decrease their own liability. This could only get worse under the new DOL fiduciary rule. In fact, I could easily think of recommendations that I've made for clients in the past that these clients still love and are very happy with years later, but that I might not have been able to make with the DOL rule in place. Again, laws and rules intended to help the little guy that end up doing the opposite seem to be the specialty of liberal politicians. So it's not surprising that this Department of Labor fiduciary rule was put forth under President Obama. It's also not surprising that Trump has delayed its implementation and sent it back to the Department of Labor for review. So the question becomes, where will it go from here? Most importantly, how can everyday investors like yourselves be sure that they're working with a reputable and qualified financial advisor under the laws and regulations that exist today? Coming up on the show, I'm going to go head-to-head with a couple of fellow financial advisors and talk more about regulation, the good, the bad, and the unnecessary. Before that, however, John Bachman is going to break down some of today's most important financial headlines. So stay tuned. You're watching The Income Generation. If you're not using someone who's well-trained in fixed income and you're born before 1966, it may just be time for you to break up with that advisor and move on. I would suggest someone who will care for you through these important years of your life. If you need help finding someone, call or write us. I'd also like to remind you of the special report entitled The Income Generation. This is available free to you, our loyal viewers, online. If you haven't downloaded your report, pick it up after the show. If you're near or in retirement, head over to theincomegeneration.com and download your special report written specifically for the needs of the income generation, again, those born before 1966. I'm David Scranton, and you've been watching The Income Generation.
And welcome back to The Income Generation. I'm John Bachman. Here's your Newsmax Finance Update, a quick recap of the stories that moved the markets this week. Profits at London-based bank HSBC slumped, according to reports last year. Analysts at the bank said the year would be remembered for unexpected economic and political events. Chancellor Angela Merkel has called the chief executive of PSA Peugeot Citroën to discuss the automaker's potential takeover of General Motors' German subsidiary in that country. Walmart stock jumped 3% after the company said its online business surged in the fourth quarter of 2016, but its profit fell as it spent more money on its e-commerce operation and in its stores. Wells Fargo's board of directors is firing 4 senior managers as part of its investigation into the bank's sales practices scandal. The board also voted to deny any 2016 bonuses to executives, and they will forfeit any unvested stock options. Back to you, David.
Thanks, John. Now that you're all up to date, let's hear from some other advisors in the field and get their insights on the benefits, limitations, and yes, the potential dangers of regulation. Let's bring in our guests. First is Doug Ferris. Doug is the co-owner and co-founder of Key Advisors Group in Dover, Delaware. He entered the business in 1992 and had successful careers at both New York Life and Prudential before starting his independent practice with Eddie Gabor in 2000. Our second guest is Eddie Gabor. He was the other co-owner of Key Advisors Group in Lewis, Delaware, and he's been in the financial planning industry now for nearly 20 years. Eddie focuses primarily on retirement and estate planning strategies and specializes in money management. Last but certainly not least is David Wright, who is the owner of Wright Financial Group in Toledo, Ohio. He specializes in educating clients about asset education, asset allocation, wealth preservation, and especially in those critical years just before and during retirement. Thanks for joining us today, gentlemen.
Thank you, David.
Thanks for having us.
So, talk to me. The DOL rule, in a solution in search of a problem, or no, is it needed?
I think it's needed. I really do. I know in our industry, when you talk about regulation, some people cringe, but I'm a big believer in holding everyone to the high fiduciary standard that everyone should be held accountable to. Now, with that being said, I do believe there are some unintended consequences, negative consequences that could happen with the way the bill is now. So although I believe in the fiduciary standard, I think there are some negatives that could come in place with the way it stands currently.
Sure, some of the negatives we've talked about earlier on the show, absolutely.
Yes.
I definitely agree with Eddie on that. I mean, as far as the fiduciary responsibility is concerned, I think we all should be willing to take that responsibility on. As far as the entire DOL rule, I definitely think it's problematic, as it will have some adverse effects on, to be specific, maybe the novice investor as well too, and maybe some the new generation coming into our business as well. Okay.
Well, as business partners, I guess I'm glad to see that you agree. That's always good news. Next, David, what are your thoughts on this? What do you think about the rules? Hopefully you disagree with them. I want to create some excitement here today.
Well, having been in the business for over 30 years, I would like to say that most of my clients have looked at me as a fiduciary and only recently have changed to a fiduciary status. And I can tell you that I think the rule is well intended, but with over 1,000 pages of implementation, I'm not sure how it's going to be monitored or regulated.
But you can overregulate anything, gentlemen. And you can, if you think about it, there's a few bad apples in every industry. So you can overregulate. Is it really necessary, though? I mean, don't you feel as though most financial advisors, people that we see when we go to conferences or we talk to on a regular basis, aren't they well-intentioned? I mean, is this really necessary? Are there that many bad apples?
I don't think there's that many bad apples, but I think...
Then why write thousands and thousands of pages of rules and regulations then if there aren't that many?
Well, that's part of the unintended consequences as they make it too complex. But I think you need to have a level playing field where everybody follows the fiduciary standard, but they need to simplify it.
Okay. Right, I agree. And then again, the over-regulation, we see how that has an adverse effect on other industries as well too. So now we have the SEC, we have FINRA, we have our local insurance agencies as well, our local insurance commissioners, and now we're going to have DOL. So there's definitely some complications there, and I'm not sure every advisor even understands it as well.
Okay. So, you know, you've heard other advisors. I'm trying to egg you on, but you're not playing with me, so that's okay. So there are other advisors out there that think the rule is just crazy. They think that it's okay if they charge a client 1.5% in a fee They think it's okay then if the client turns around and pays a secondary fee because the advisor gets lazy and the advisor outsources all that business. There's advisors out there that are charging fees in excess of 2 or even 3% a year. And they're claiming that there's no need for this regulation.
Well, look, if they bring that value or they're charging that fee, which I'm sure they are, or they wouldn't charge it, as long as it's properly disclosed.
Over 2 or over 3%? How could anybody add that kind of value?
Well, that's why this DOL rule is important.
I don't mind disclosing to my clients what I make in fees. It's all about education, getting to know that client, getting to know what their situation is, and I'll disclose any fees up front as long as the client's understanding and on the game plan.
I think Dave said it right. If we can justify your fee and you bring value to your client, truly, really all the client should be concerned about is their bottom line.
Okay.
And if that value is there, then fine.
What do you think is reasonable, though? I mean, what do you think is a reasonable fee, where you start to get over a certain limit? There's got to be a maximum, there's got to be a cap when you say, wow, somebody is just a good enough salesperson that they can talk the prospective client into paying that fee. There has to be some kind of limit. What do you think is the upside, the maximum limit on what's a reasonable asset management fee?
Well, the reason why that's such a tough question is we're not a cookie cutter business. At least our practice is not. I think it's a matter of what you're paying.
Oh, come on, give me an answer. I want an Dave, come on, give me a number. I want an answer here. There's got to be a number.
There isn't an exact number.
This guy here, Eddie should run for politics, shouldn't he?
Yeah.
He's talking around the answer.
No, I'm
Political
smarter than
correct
that.
answer. No, I just feel that based on what we're trying to help the client achieve, whether it be an insured product, whether it be an asset-based product or an income-based product, the fee is all relative to what the product is, what it's trying to solve for that client.
Okay, great. We have another politician, future politician of the world.
Not political, Dave. It's not political at all.
Bail me out, Doug, here. There's got to be some maximum number in your mind that if it's the most aggressive strategy that requires the most active management, where you say, you know what, I just can't justify anything above that.
I think truly too much is always too much in any industry itself. But I believe what Eddie was saying, which really does make sense. Every client basically is needing a lot of different services. So if a client is someone that you're going to pay a lot of attention to on a regular basis, as a monthly basis, again, maybe they're going to get charged a little bit more than somebody that maybe you're going to see 3 to 4 times a year. So that's why it's really a different. I don't think he's avoiding the question. I think it's a difficult answer to come up.
I'll tell you what, I'll make you happy. I'll give you an answer.
Okay, I love it.
2% per year, I think, is, you're asking about a maximum.
That's the absolute
and I'm
maximum.
sure there's going to be some times where a little bit more is value and a little bit less. But from a maximum on average, I think if an individual's paying 2% per year or less, as long as they're getting the service that they need, I believe that's fair.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate
welcome.
getting a
You
number
put me
from
on
you.
the spot, so
That's
I'm answering
perfect,
your
Eddie.
question.
But now let's think about this for a second. There's advisors out there, and we all have met these advisors that charge a client 1.5%. They've got another intermediary, maybe a parent firm. We all own our own practices, but maybe a parent firm which has to take a little nick of that fee. And then you also have then money being outsourced to a third-party money manager, where we've seen some of these fees get really close, if not exceed 3%. I mean, could you gentlemen ever justify a fee even anywhere near 3% per year to a client?
No, I feel personally that's excessive. That's an excessive fee, 3%.
Yeah, I mean, do the math. What do you need to average? If you're a conservative investor and you're charging them 3% a year, what do they need to earn on their investment to net what their goal is?
Sure.
It's just an unrealistic bogey to have to hit.
Right, so if you had them in the riskiest investment, where you were managing, let's say pork bellies futures, or you're managing stocks and you're writing covered calls and you're rolling up your sleeves and you're doing all that work, still 2% seems to be kind of a reasonable maximum number, wouldn't you think?
I would think. I mean, most of the portfolios we would manage would be less active, a little bit more income-based, and probably a lot less than that.
Yeah, my number actually, by the way, my number was going to be between 1.5 and 1.75. That was going to be my maximum number, just for our regular income generation viewers that I know are wondering what was going on in my head, at least I hope they were. So gentlemen, if you can stick around, that'd be great. We're going to come right back. We have more to talk about this DOL fiduciary rule, so stay with us.
Read David J. Scranton's groundbreaking new book, Return on Principle, 7 Core Values to Help Protect Your Money in Good Times and Bad. Discover practical solutions to the financial challenges facing today's generation of retirees and near retirees. Learn the truth about Wall Street, the financial media, and the secrets they try to hide from everyday investors. This isn't just another book about investing. Working Americans who have lived through 2 major stock market crashes and the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression in the past 16 years don't need another book about investing. David Scranton's approach to financial planning is a holistic system designed for maximum protection, strategic growth, and reliable income regardless of market conditions. Stop planning for retirement with your fingers crossed. Read Return on Principle, 7 core values to help protect your money in good times and bad. Available now.
Welcome back to the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, your host. Now it's time to bring back our Financial Advisor Roundtable. Rejoining us, we have Eddie Gabor, Doug Ferris, and David Wright. Thanks for sticking around, gentlemen.
Thank you, David.
Now, I'm going to ask you to think back a ways because you gentlemen have been around for a long time in the business. You're very successful. You know, you've gotten to a point, I don't want to say money's no object, but the financial success of your business is secondary at this point of your careers to the financial success of your clients. But think back to the early days in the business. Remember the pressures when you came into the business and how tough it was when you had to think about, gee, you know, I've got this thing over here that's really, really good. This one thing that's really, really good for my client, and it makes me some money. But I've got this other thing that is okay for my client, but makes me a lot of money. You know, how did you wrestle with that decision early on? And how do we create this rule in such a way that protects investors from that, especially with new advisors in the field who may be feeling those same pressures?
You know, I think we all started off in the business on a commission basis. I mean, to be honest, there's no way we could have survived financially on a fee-based practice.
Which, of course, is my concern, as you saw earlier in the show, is the fact that what happens if they change that now? You know, is that a barrier to entry in the business? All of a sudden, can people no longer afford to get in the business if there's no commissions? So go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, that's a big dilemma, and that's where so the fiduciary, as much as I believe in it, I do feel for the new people coming into our industry, how are they going to survive? Because our clientele fit the net worth that the fiduciary standard in the fee business is perfect for them.
And I agree. I want new people to come in. I want competition in the industry. It's good for every industry, including ours. However, remember that at the end of the day, what's more important than their survival is your survival, that you're having the absolute best thing done for you. So how do you do that? Think back, again, you remember early on in your career, how did you make those tough decisions when maybe you were a little more hand-to-mouth in terms of your revenue?
I would say that, you know, we made those decisions based on a client-to-client basis, and I think the proof's in the pudding. I've been in this business 24 years. I've always felt like I was doing the right thing for the client. And again, it comes back to you, because right now our business is based on a referral-based business, and I think you can only survive that way if you're truly doing the right thing for the client.
Of course.
100% of the time.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely true. I just wish all financial advisors saw it the way you gentlemen see it. I know for me, what I did, David, is I lived at home. I lived with Mom, and I bartended 3-4 nights a week to make extra money. And it was the bartending, it's rolling up my sleeves, it's doing truly hard work that allowed me to pay my bills. So I never once had to feel that dilemma when meeting with a new prospective client, where I could look at that client and say, let's do the right thing for them, even if I made less. How did you deal with that early on in your career, Dave?
Well, I dealt with it by being a church choir director, and my wife as well. And I sold a lot in the early years. I sold my couch, I sold my chair. Just kidding here, but all kidding aside, it was a challenge in the early years, and you have those ethical dilemmas when you're first getting into the business and meeting with clients. But if you always stick with the client needs and the education of that client, you make the right calls. And even though this new rule could pose problems for the newer reps coming into the business, there's going to be a lot more interning going on, perhaps people coming into practices where there's more assets that they can kind of wean themselves into the business that way.
So you can at least empathize. I mean, let's face it, did any of us come into the business working with affluent individuals day one?
Absolutely not.
No.
No way.
So at the end of the day, we all come into the business working with mom and pop, working with the average investor, and trying to help people grow so they can become affluent. You know, I was just on the phone the other day with somebody who's a regular viewer of the Income Generation, and it was interesting because I was able to show him how just in a few more years, just by conservative investing, he's actually going to have a net worth of about $1 million. And he never thought he'd have $1 million net worth, and he's there just because it was good saving, good investing, sound financial planning from day one. And that's really what the business is about, is it not?
Absolutely. That's a gratifying part when you're able to help someone achieve goals that they didn't think were attainable. And it's just like anything in life. It all comes down to discipline, right?
All comes down to self-discipline. But the problem is, you can't have a client come in and put you in a lie detector test and say, okay, I'm going to give you a polygraph. You tell me if you're going to make the best decision for me or you're going to be financially motivated. I mean, as ethical as everybody is, still, wouldn't you, if somebody came in with a polygraph machine, what would you do? Probably tell them to go home, right? I mean, people can't do that. And that's the only way they can really know for sure what's going on in your head, is it not?
I think our clients today are a lot more educated financially as well, too. I can tell you that I'd rather work with a client that has a little bit more knowledge about the business, about the industry as well, too. So I think that's important, too. And let's face it, back in the day when we started, sometimes it was just a leap of faith that we're doing the right thing for the client, and it'll all come out for us in the end, and it truly has.
Not to mention the fact that in the 80s and 90s, the best stock market in U.S. history, you could do virtually anything.
Yes.
And you looked like a hero. You always looked like you were doing the right thing for a client.
Buy and hold.
But over the last couple of years, since the year 2000, it's been that much tougher. So, gentlemen, I need you to stick around just a little bit longer, please, if it's okay.
All right.
Love to hear more. I'm sure you also would love to hear more from our financial advisor roundtable. So stay with us. We'll be right back. We have a lot more to discuss. If you're near or in retirement, head over to theincomegeneration.com and download your special report written specifically for the needs of the income generation. Again, those born before 1966. I'm David Scranton, and you've been watching The Income Generation. Welcome back to The Income Generation. I'm David Scranton. Now, let's bring back our financial advisor roundtable, and we're going to focus now on the Inside Minute. We're going to do it a little bit early this week because we have some interesting questions to ask and how they affect ethics and the DOL rule. Of course, we have Doug Ferris, we have Eddie Gabor, and we have David Wright rejoining us. So, gentlemen, the financial advisor quiz, the Inside Minute, here we go. How do you do your research? I'm going to ask both of you. I know you're partners, so right. It's a similar answer, but how do you do your research, Doug?
Well, I think we have to keep abreast of every sector of the market and do a lot of reading and the research ourselves. Also, keep in mind that we do outsource a lot of our assets to professional money managers, and the purpose behind that is it allows us to deliver the service and advice to our clients. So really, we really feel that is really the best of both worlds as well.
So Eddie, what do you do? Do you, when you outsource it, you charge the client extra because you're outsourcing the money management?
No, we don't. We're a believer as you're as good as the people around you. And one of the biggest benefits with the contacts that we have is the resources they provide us in addition to the other research that we do. There's countless of hours spent behind the scenes when we're not with clients looking into this data to try to make as good of a decision as possible for our clients, because after all, that's what they're paying us for. They trust us to try to make as good educated decisions as possible with their net worth. So it's not having a big ego and pretending like we have all the answers. It's using all the resources that we have available, reading lots of information, and coming up as a team to our conclusion after hearing a lot of different opinions and reading a lot of different publications.
You make an important point. It's kind of funny. If you think about it, when you meet with your financial advisor, and assuming your financial advisor is as successful as these gentlemen on the show today, you go in their office and you may have to wait a few minutes, and then the client before you is leaving as you're waiting, and then when you're ready to leave, you're done with the meeting, the next person is sitting in the lobby. So you have to ask yourself, gee, if they're spending all that time with you, educating you and helping you, how is that advisor able to do all of his or her research alone? But gentlemen, you're not like, you got to get with the times. You got to become modern day financial advisors here. Modern day financial advisors is that you do nothing. You outsource everything, you do nothing, you don't even stay current, and basically you sit back and you collect big fat paychecks. You don't do any research at all. So why are you guys still doing research? I mean, you don't have to.
Look, if you have that mentality, you aren't going to last. Okay, we're going to take market share from you if that's the mentality that you take.
Right. Good thing you have a practice in Delaware.
That's
that I have
right.
to say that much.
We want to meet up with those financial advisors, as a matter of fact. But again, as Eddie did say, it is important that we use all the resources around us, and that actually could include CPAs, estate planning attorneys, and anything that our client may need. So we want to provide a service and advice to our clients.
Yeah, you know, it's incredible. It's so true that, you know, I find, you probably find the same thing I find in Connecticut. And, you know, Connecticut, where my practice is, we have a little bigger state than Delaware, not much, just a little bit. But I find 70–80% of the people who come in have advisors that take the lazy route, that really do nothing, and they just outsource everything, and they bill the second fee back to their clients. Stay with us. We'll be right back. These gentlemen are sticking around. More with the Inside Minute.
The closing numbers on the markets today. At one point, the market fell as if down a well, over 700 points.
Apple shares are just getting hammered this morning.
We're down by between 3 and 4.5% generally across these markets. Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate. We're red everywhere, essentially, down by 4–5%.
We're down over 16%. Dow at the same time has fallen about 18%.
The stock market is now down 21%.
Because we're now down 43%.
What in the world is happening on Wall Street?
Finally, there is an alternative. Read David J. Scranton's groundbreaking new book, Return on Principle: 7 Core Values to Help Protect Your Money in Good Times and Bad. Discover practical solutions to the financial challenges facing today's generation of retirees and near retirees. Learn the truth about Wall Street, the financial media, and the secrets they try to hide from everyday investors. This isn't just another book about investing. Working Americans who have lived through 2 major stock market crashes and the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression in the past 16 years don't need another book about investing. David Scranton's approach to financial planning is a holistic system designed for maximum protection, strategic growth, and reliable income regardless of market conditions. Stop planning for retirement with your fingers crossed. Plan with confidence, knowledge, and peace of mind. Read Return on Principle: 7 Core Values to Help Protect Your Money in Good Times and Bad. Available now.
Welcome back to the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, your host. Now let's bring back our panel members. Rejoining us today, we have Doug Ferris, we have Eddie Gabor, and lastly, but certainly not least, we have David Wright. So David, tell me, you know, how do you determine what kind of asset allocation somebody should have? I mean, I assume you probably do the risk tolerance questionnaire that most advisors use to get questions answered, so you can determine what their risk tolerance level is?
Maybe earlier in my career, but not anymore. I think a client needs to go through a couple of market downturns to really know deeply what their risk tolerance is. We go through a confidential fact questionnaire and find out where their assets are located, and they really, through questioning, we can find out what their tolerances are.
Okay, so you don't give them this questionnaire? I mean, wow.
David,
I mean, how do you cover your rear end?
David,
I mean, that's how all financial advisors are taught to cover their rear end.
Yeah, we're not here to cover my rear end. We're here to cover their rear end, or their derriere, their retirement, their future financial security. So the risk tolerance has kind of been thrown out the window here, and we just look at the assets.
Yeah, and if you think about it, the reality is that it's hard. You know, it's like going to a doctor and saying, well, you have a blockage. Do you want open heart surgery? Do you want stents? What do you want? How do you know? He's the cardiologist, not you. So, again, Eddie Gabor, Doug Ferris, David Wright, thank you for joining us today. Obviously, it's hard to be wrong when you're right. Before we go, I'd like to thank all of our guests and also to thank all y'all, our new and returning viewers. And if I'd like you to take anything away from today's show, it's the understanding that rules and regulations, supposedly intended to help and protect the average Joe, sometimes end up having just the opposite effect. So, when you hear politicians and you hear pundits blasting Trump for delaying the DOL fiduciary rule, be aware that the criticism is probably mostly politically based. Odds are that most of these critics don't really even understand the details proposed in the rule or its potential to harm the very people that it's intended to help. and that means you. And please be aware, this industry is already strictly regulated and that many of us in it are already fiduciaries, legally and ethically bound to serve in our clients' best interest, and happy to do so. Thank you for watching.